It was one of the most audacious acts of terror the world had ever seen. They used 350 kilos of gelignite and TNT, and they planted the bomb in broad daylight in a building full of people. Nearly 60 years on, and it is as fresh in the memory as ever for those involved.
I was running as fast as I could, with the bomb on my shoulder. There were a lot of explosives inside. It was heavy.
The bomb killed 91 people and 45 others were injured. But little did the bombers of Jerusalem's King David Hotel back in 1946 know that they were one day to be hailed as the founding fathers of a new age of terror. For their success inspired waves of imitators around the world.
If my sacrifice for that is to be called a terrorist, then I'm glad to have been a terrorist for liberation.
We didn't mind being called terrorists then, because we actually used force, such force, a brutal force, in order to get rid of them.
We knew we only had one chance in 1,000 of coming out alive, but death was around every corner.
This is the story of the birth of modern terrorism, of the activists who invented it, and of how it has been appropriated and dispersed around the globe. Jerusalem, cradle of faith to Muslim, Jew, and Christian alike. Jerusalem, the birthplace of modern terrorism.
After a bomb explosion caused by terrorists on the British headquarters at Jerusalem, one entire corner of the King David Hotel, a building of 7 stories, was razed to the ground. The stone floors were cut clean.
In scenes eerily reminiscent of New York 55 years later, the Jerusalem bomb was the beginning of terrorism as a media event, designed to capture the world's attention.
The latest casualty list included 65 killed, 47 injured.
The perpetrators, Zionist Jews, members of Menachem Begin's Irgun terrorist network. Begin, who would one day become Prime Minister of Israel, described this tactic as turning Palestine into a glass house, where the entire world was looking in.
I think it was one of these acts of violence that, ahead of its time, in an era before CNN, before instantaneous news, was choreographed precisely to attract international attention.
We were a minority, but we were a minority with a clear ideology that we must have a Jewish state to rebuild the state which was existing many, many hundreds of years ago.
The bombing of the King David Hotel was perhaps one of the most significant terrorist incidents of the 20th century. For many decades, it actually held the infamous record of having killed the largest number of people.
In a fight for liberty, you have always those who are more, call them extreme, or more adamant, or call them staunch, and they want it immediately, not to wait for the Messiah.
Still lying under the shadow of terrorist attacks, many areas of Palestine are...
By the end of World War II, the British, who had been made responsible for looking after Palestine by the old League of Nations 27 years earlier, found it to be a serious headache. They were caught in the middle of the Arabs and the Jews, both of whom wanted the country for their own, were unwilling to peacefully coexist, and were agreed on only one thing: their hatred of the British, whom they both saw as foreign occupiers. The British military and administrative headquarters was here, in the south wing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. The luxury hotel itself still functioned with guests, restaurants, bars, and Sudanese waiters.
Jerusalem at that time, it was a fortress, and I walk through the town and put in my mind every place and think about how can we attack this place. If we succeed, it's very important the whole world will see that we can fight even the British.
Begin and Ellis decided on a daring plan. They would strike at the very heart of British rule, the King David Hotel itself. If they succeeded here, the whole world would take notice. The terrorist bomb was hidden in 7 milk churns and delivered in a hijacked pickup truck to the hotel's basement kitchen.
We jumped out, and everyone took up their positions. I took the churn and started to run. I was thinking, how do I get to the place where I have to put the churn down? That's how I started. Anyway, there were lots of people around in the corridor, and we tried to move them out of the way. Here, there, to the side. But there were some who resisted, but we threatened them with our weapons. I wasn't dressed as a civilian or a soldier. I was dressed like an Arab, with a jalaba and a keffiyeh, with that ring on your head. You know, like, what's he called? The leader of the Arabs. You know, Arafat. There were 7 churns, weighing 350 kilos in all. I ran until I reached the place where I had to put it down, with the churn on my shoulder. I carried on, until I got to the place where the British people were. I saw a pillar that used to be here, and I put the churn down and ran away immediately. I waited in my position until all the churns were together, and then the time would come for the explosion. All the churns together were like one whole man, a complete bomb.
The bomb went off at 12:37 and was devastating. But of the 91 dead, only 28 were British. 17 Jews died alongside 41 Arabs. Of all these, 54 were innocent civilians, unconnected to the British authorities in any way.
It's classic terror in that it's off the mainstream. It's not a reflection of the policies of the then Israeli leadership, which had a very strong ethical approach to the use of violence, admirable in many ways. And it shows, too, a sign of the future in that it's the damage being done by the splinter of the main movement, which is the damage we frequently call terrorist, and which is the most likely to be without any moral dimension.
Once more, the civilized world has received a rude shock at the hands of fanatics whose wanton act is contrary to the dictates of all creeds alike and imperils the best interests of the cause that it strives to promote.
The Irgun denied that they aimed at civilian targets, but one man at least had a different opinion. In 1948, the British Chief Secretary in Palestine, Sir Henry Gurney, wrote in his diary of how one Irgun attack was indiscriminately aimed at civilian targets and was designed to create panic among the population. 3 years later, Gurney himself was to be assassinated, as liberation movements all over the world took note of the flame that had been ignited in Palestine. By 1948, the British and the world community had lost their appetite for the fight against the Jewish terrorists, and the British abandoned Palestine, leaving Arab and Jew to fight it out amongst themselves. But elsewhere in their restless colonies, others had watched and learnt from the success of the Zionist terrorists.
In the early 1960s, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Ella Lemonser, concocted a plan for false flag operations as a pretext to invade Cuba and for war with the Soviet Union. In Operation Northwoods, they planned to hijack jets by remote control, crash them, and blame the attack on Cuba. There were many other terrorist attacks they planned to carry out that were contained within the document. One scenario mentioned was the destruction of a U.S. naval vessel that was to be blamed on a foreign power as a pretext for war with any enemy they picked. President Lyndon Baines Johnson went operational with Northwoods on June 8, 1967, during the Six-Day War. During the Six-Day War between Israel and the Arab nations, the USS Liberty was sent by Johnson to collect electronic intelligence in the eastern Mediterranean. The clearly marked U.S. intelligence ship was 14 miles off the coast of Israel in international waters.
A short time after the air attack had been completed, The 3 torpedo boats approach us from our starboard quarter at high speed and in an apparent torpedo launch attitude.
Israeli surveillance aircraft flew low over the ship and clearly identified it as an American vessel. At 2 p.m. that afternoon, the USS Liberty was attacked by 3 Mirage 3 fighter bombers. From the onset of the attack, the fighter bombers were jamming U.S. signals. Not only were they jamming U.S. signals specifically, they were also unmarked, the only unmarked aircraft in Israel's arsenal. The fighter bombers strafed the ships with their cannons, dropped conventional munitions and napalm on the ship, repeatedly from stem to stern. After the Mirages had done their work, the ship was hit by medium bomber Dassault missiles carrying napalm and other munitions like white phosphorus. The USS Liberty was then attacked by 3 Israeli torpedo boats bearing Israeli flags. The torpedo gunboats opened fire with high-caliber machine guns and launched torpedoes. A single torpedo struck the ship, blowing a hole in both sides, entering the ship and leaving a 30-foot exit hole when it exploded. Then the torpedo boats began strafing life rafts in the water, an international war term. While all of this was happening, the oversized American flag flew clearly above the ship. The attack on the Liberty went on for hour after hour after hour. During the entire attack, the USS Liberty continually called the 6th Fleet that was nearby, begging for air support or rescue. 2 aircraft carriers in the Med responded by launching fighter aircraft. Unbelievably, they were recalled by the White House. Rear Admiral Geist, then commanding the carriers in the 6th Fleet, called Washington personally to confirm the recall order. Secretary of Defense McNamara came on the line, and then President Johnson himself told Geist, "I want that goddamn ship going to the bottom. No help. Recall the wings." Imagine being Admiral Geist begging the president to allow you to defend an American ship that's under attack and being told by him that he wants the ship going to the bottom. Despite the fact that the U.S. carriers withdrew their help, a Russian spy ship appeared and witnessed part of the attack. After 3 hours into the attack, the Israelis withdrew because there were witnesses, allowing the damaged USS Liberty to limp to safety. 40 years after the attack on the USS Liberty, we know exactly what happened. I've interviewed former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Thomas Moorer. I've interviewed the admirals that were on the line who heard what President Johnson said. I've even talked to the head JAG officer of the Navy who was ordered to falsify the reports and cover up what had really happened. One of the Israeli pilots has gone public as well, saying that 3 times he refused over his radio to headquarters to attack the ship, saying clearly that it was an American ship in international waters and an ally. He was ordered under threat of court-martial to engage the ship. In a nutshell, this is what happened. President Johnson had personal control over the ship, parked it in the Mediterranean, made a backroom deal with Israel to attack it with an order to kill all aboard. Then the attack on the ship was to be blamed on Egypt. The U.S. would enter the war and take over the entire Middle East in the aftermath of the attack on the most highly decorated ship in U.S. history. The captain and his entire crew were told they would spend life in prison or be killed if they told anyone what happened. Captain William L. McGonigal was given the Congressional Medal of Honor in secret and told not to tell anyone that he had won the award.
But even these hardline conservatives knew that the Wolfowitz Doctrine was likely too radical to win the support of the foreign policy establishment, their own Republican Party, and the American people. In their defining document, written in September of 2000, a full year before 9/11, they acknowledged that the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one. Absent, in their own chilling words, some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. 1 year later, that event would arrive.
מה שישראל לאחרונה ניתצו כמה עניינים. מה שלא יאות, וגם משהו שעדיין משיח ליבו. אז הייתה משהו ומה ידיעתו. עושים. הכנראה שהיא מספיק, כאילו שהיום כבר שוד, כמה שוד בגיל עדיין ליבו, אבל יש עוד כמה שעות, אבל יש להשתדל גם היום, ובשורות טובות. זה שמחה וטוב לבוא. כדי שחסידים מקפידים שכל בנמים ימצא שמחה. בשורות טובות, הצלחה רבה.
Because, of course, other spirings have been caught in the US in the last decade, most notably the so-called dancing Israelis who were arrested shortly after 9/11. They were seen celebrating the collapse of the Twin Towers.
Trace Gallagher. Thank you, Trace.
That Israelis who worked at the World Trade Center were warned by the Israeli government to take the day off on 9/11.
And also the alleged art student spiring, which was rounded up in 2002. And they, again, were supposedly Israeli Mossad agents. Now, both of these spirings weren't prosecuted. And, in fact, the stories have been quietly removed from things like Fox News websites and things. And the spies, or alleged spies, were just quietly deported back to Israel. There was no political hoo-ha. There was no media hoo-ha. And there was no...
The United States is committed to Israel's security. We are committed to that special bond.
I grabbed my binoculars and I could see the towers from my window. And this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van parked. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. And I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
Amazingly enough, we have found the moving company where the 5 Israelis worked.
Was this building being used as a front for some kind of Israeli intelligence operation that possibly was doing surveillance on the Arab American community? Were there men celebrating or slapping 5s or whatever?
We had received an all-points bulletin, and I just happened to see the van and, hollered over to my lieutenant. I think that could be the van. We checked it out, and it was. We were all on edge, obviously, so I really wasn't looking to make friends with these people, and neither were the officers that I were with. Once we started talking to them, they were pretty much like, hey, we're not against you, we're with you.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
The 5 Israelis were detained for 10 weeks and finally deported on immigration violations after the FBI cleared them of any involvement in 9/11.